The director of guest relations at one of the oldest luxury hotels in San Francisco points across the lobby at a quiet man in a faded field jacket and says, loud enough for the whole room to hear, that he is a thief. Not because anyone saw him take anything, not because there was a shred of proof, because a wealthy guest's watch had gone missing and someone had to have taken it. And of everyone standing in that marble lobby, the man in the worn jacket was the one who looked like he did not belong. Security came. A crowd gathered. The man was asked to empty his pockets in front of a lobby full of strangers, and he did it, calmly, without a word of protest, laying his keys and his phone and an old paperback on the front desk like a man who had nothing to hide, because he had nothing to hide. There was no watch, and the woman who had accused him was already deciding, in the hot panic of being wrong, to double down instead of back down. Here is what none of them knew. The man they had just accused of theft had, 6 weeks earlier, quietly signed the papers that made him the owner of the building they were all standing in. They were about to find out. And a 108-year-old hotel was about to learn what it feels like to accuse the one person it could not afford to be wrong about. There is a hotel on Nob Hill in San Francisco called the Ellsworth. It has been there since 1916. It survived 2 fires, 1 earthquake, a war it turned into a hospital, and 100 years of the city changing around it, and it wears all of that, the way old money wears a coat, like it has nothing left to prove. The lobby was cathedral quiet. 40-foot ceilings with plaster roses in the corners, a staircase of Carrara marble that curved up into gold light. Fresh flowers, $600 of them, changed every morning whether anyone looked at them or not. A grand piano nobody was allowed to play unless they were the person hired to play it. The whole room was built to make you feel one of 2 things the instant you walked in: that you had arrived, or that you had wandered somewhere you were not meant to be. Rooms started at $900 a night. The suite on the top floor ran $4,000. The people who stayed at the Ellsworth did not ask the price, because asking the price was itself a kind of failing, and the Ellsworth was in the business of never letting you fail in front of anyone. And on a gray Tuesday morning in November, a man walked into that lobby off a red eye, unshaven, carrying a canvas duffel that had clearly been dropped on a lot of floors. He wore a faded olive field jacket worn soft at the elbows, a plain gray Henley, jeans and boots that had walked considerably more than they'd been polished. He had a paperback sticking out of one pocket. He looked tired in the specific way you look tired after a night in coach, and he stood just inside the doors for a moment, looking up at the plaster roses and the gold light, with an expression that was hard to read, something between a memory and a plan. His name was Marcus Rourke. If you had watched movies in the last 20 years, you knew the face. The quiet one. The reluctant hero. The man who did the hard right thing at the worst possible cost to himself, and who, in real life, was known for almost nothing except being decent. But nobody looked at him twice that morning, because he had made very sure that nobody would. He had flown in on a red eye in his oldest clothes on purpose. He had not called ahead. He had told no one at the hotel he was coming, because 6 weeks ago, Marcus Rourke's foundation had bought the Ellsworth, outbidding a group that planned to gut the old building into luxury condos, and Marcus had heard a rumor that troubled him. He had heard that the grand old hotel, somewhere in its last decade, had quietly stopped being kind, that it had learned to sort people at the door. And he did not want to hear that from a report. He wanted to see it with his own eyes, as the kind of person a place like this decides, in one glance, does not matter. He was about to find out he had heard right. The woman who accused him was named Diane Faircloth, and to understand what she did that morning, you have to go back 22 years, Because Diane did not start out suspicious. She started out trusting. That was the whole problem. At 57, Diane Faircloth was the most feared and most flawless employee the Ellsworth had. Director of Guest Relations for 19 years. She wore charcoal suits that never wrinkled, and pearls that were real, and a wristwatch set precisely 2 minutes fast. Because she believed a person who is early has already won. She knew the name of every regular, the anniversary of every honeymooner, the allergy of every diplomat. She could look at a pair of shoes and tell you a man's income, his profession, and whether he tipped. She was, by every measure the hotel used, magnificent at her job. And she policed the door of the Ellsworth like a woman guarding something that had once been stolen from her. Because it had been. 22 years ago, when Diane was a young assistant manager still learning the floor, a charming man in a rumpled but expensive-looking coat had checked in, claiming to be an art dealer between homes. He was warm. He was funny. He remembered everyone's name. He talked about paintings the way other people talk about old friends. And Diane, young and eager and proud of her own good judgment, had vouched for him, had extended his credit, comped his dinners, waved him past the ordinary checks, because surely a man that gracious, that knowledgeable, was exactly the kind of guest the Ellsworth existed for. He was a con man. Over 4 months he ran up a fortune in charges he never paid, and on the night of the hotel's centennial gala, he walked out a service entrance with a small Whistler drawing that had hung in the library since 1922. And he was never found. Diane's mentor, the general manager who had trained her, a kind, tired man named Harold, who was 2 years from retirement, stood in front of the owners and took the blame. He said the oversight was his. He said a young manager should not lose her career for trusting the way he had taught her to trust. He was quietly retired 3 months early, without the send-off he'd earned, and Diane kept her job because he gave it back to her with his own. She never forgave herself. And somewhere in the not forgiving, the warm young woman who had trusted a stranger's charm hardened into a woman who would never ever be fooled by a humble exterior again. She had watched kindness cost the best man she knew everything he had. So she stopped trusting the surface of people entirely, and she called that vigilance, and she told herself it was the thing that protected the hotel, when the truth was, it was the thing that protected Diane from ever having to feel that particular shame twice. So on a gray November morning, when a self-important guest named Calloway came storming out of the lounge announcing that his watch, a watch he made sure everyone knew cost more than a car, had vanished from the side table where he'd been sitting, and Diane's eyes swept the lobby for the likeliest explanation and landed on a tired, unshaven man in a faded field jacket standing near where Calloway had been sitting. 22 years of never again fired all at once. And Diane Faircloth pointed. "That man," Diane said, "by the flowers. Don't let him leave." The lobby, which had been murmuring, went quiet in the way a room goes quiet when it senses a scene. Marcus turned. He saw a woman in a charcoal suit walking toward him with 2 security officers falling in behind her, and he saw a red-faced man in the lounge doorway pointing, and he understood. In the way you understand weather, exactly what was about to happen. "Sir," Diane said, and her voice was courteous and cold and pitched for the whole room. "A guest has reported a valuable item missing. From precisely where you're standing. I'm going to have to ask you not to leave, and I'm going to have to ask you to account for yourself." "Okay," Marcus said. That was all. Just, okay. He set his duffel down slowly so no one could mistake the motion, and he stood there, open-handed, calm. "Do you have a reservation with us?" Diane asked, though she already knew what she thought the answer was. "I don't," Marcus said. "Are you a guest of the hotel?" "Not tonight, no." "Then may I ask what you're doing in this lobby?" Marcus looked up at the plaster roses again, and something crossed his face, and he said, simply, looking at the building, "It's a beautiful building." Diane's mouth tightened. To her, that answer was a con man's answer. Vague, disarming, the kind of thing the man with the Whistler drawing might have said. "I'm going to ask you to empty your pockets," she said, "here, now, in front of these witnesses, so there's no question later." A younger manager might have hesitated. Marcus did not make her ask twice. He reached into the field jacket and laid its contents on the marble front desk, one item at a time, unhurried. A set of keys. A phone with a cracked case. A worn leather billfold. The paperback, a folded boarding pass from a red-eye that had landed 4 hours ago. No watch. The security officers checked the duffel. Toothbrush, 2 shirts. A charger. No watch. For a moment the whole lobby held its breath, because everyone could see there was nothing. And everyone was waiting for Diane Faircloth to say the words a decent person says when they have been wrong in public. "I'm so sorry. There's been a mistake." She did not say them. Because backing down meant admitting she had once again misjudged, and some part of Diane would rather be cruel than be caught being wrong. Because being wrong was the thing that had cost Harold everything. "That doesn't mean he didn't hand it off," Diane said to the room now gathering steam. "Or hide it. We'll be reviewing the footage, sir. Until we've resolved this, I'm going to ask you to wait in the manager's office, and I'd remind everyone that this hotel takes the security of its guests extremely seriously." Behind the front desk, a young clerk named Rosa Vega, 24, 8 months at the Ellsworth, still living with 3 roommates in the Mission, stood frozen. Because Rosa had been at the desk the whole time, and Rosa had seen something Diane had not. And Marcus Rourke, being publicly marched toward a back office for a theft he could not have committed, turned to the young security officer at his elbow, a kid, really, 22, whose hand on Marcus's arm was so light it was barely there, and said, quietly, kindly, "It's all right. It's not your fault. You're doing your job." Then he stopped, and he asked Diane Faircloth a single question. He did not raise his voice. It was the quietest thing said in that marble room all morning. "If I'd walked in here in a suit that cost as much as that man's watch," Marcus asked, "would you have asked me to empty my pockets? Or would you have asked him to describe where he'd last seen it?" Diane opened her mouth. Nothing came out. Into that silence, a small voice said, "Miss Faircloth." It was Rosa. She had come out from behind the desk, and her hands were shaking, and she was doing the single hardest thing a 24-year-old can do, which is contradict the most powerful person in her working life in front of a crowd. "Mr. Calloway was at the bar before he sat in the lounge," Rosa said. "I watched him take the watch off and set it next to his drink because he said the band was pinching. I don't think he ever put it back on." She swallowed. "I think it's still at the bar. Or in the chair. I don't think this man was ever near it." Diane stared at her. The head bartender was already moving. 10 seconds later, he straightened up from behind the lounge sofa, holding a heavy gold watch that had slid down into the gap beside the cushion where Mr. Calloway had been sitting, exactly where a watch goes when a careless man sets it in his lap and forgets. "Found it," the bartender called. Mr. Calloway had the decency to look embarrassed, which was more than could be said for what happened next, because Diane Faircloth handed a clean and graceful exit. Could not take it. She smoothed her jacket. She turned to Marcus with a smile that had no warmth in it at all. "Well," she said, "a simple misunderstanding. You'll appreciate that we have a duty to our guests, and given the circumstances, given how you presented, I'm sure you understand our caution. No harm done. You're free to go, of course. Given how you presented." She said it like it settled the matter, like the whole thing had been, in the end, his own fault for looking the way he looked. And that was the exact moment the elevator opened across the lobby, and a woman in a navy suit stepped out, scanning the room with the brisk look of someone searching for somebody she is late to meet. Her name was Eleanor Shaw, and she was the managing director of the Ellsworth, the most senior executive in the building, the one person Diane Faircloth reported to and revered. Eleanor had come down to the lobby at 10 o'clock, as scheduled, to greet the hotel's new owner, who was flying in that day to meet the executive team for the first time. She had a folder with her. She was, she would say later, mildly anxious, because no one had ever met the man, and the whole future of the Ellsworth now rested with him. She scanned the lobby, and her eyes found the man standing by the front desk in the faded field jacket, his pockets emptied out on the marble in front of him, a security officer at his elbow. Eleanor Shaw went absolutely white. "Mr. Rourke," she said, and her voice carried across the silent lobby like a dropped glass. She crossed the floor almost at a run. "Mr. Rourke, I am so sorry I didn't. We were expecting you at 10 upstairs." She stopped in front of him, and then she turned slowly to Diane, and to the security officers, and to the little pile of a tired man's belongings laid out on the desk of the hotel he owned. "What," Eleanor said quietly, "is happening here?" And a 108-year-old hotel realized, all at once, marble floor to plaster roses, that it had just accused its own owner of being a thief. You could hear it move through the lobby like cold water. Rosa's hand went to her mouth. The young security officer let go of Marcus's arm, as if it had caught fire. Mr. Calloway found somewhere else to look. And Diane Faircloth, Diane, who was never fooled, who could read a man's whole life in his shoes, stood in the center of the most public mistake of her career, and felt the floor of the last 22 years fall away beneath her. Marcus picked his keys up off the desk. He did not smile. He did not gloat. He put the keys, the billfold, the cracked phone, and the paperback back into his jacket, one item at a time, exactly as unhurried as when he'd taken them out. Then he looked at Eleanor and said, gently, "It's all right, Eleanor. Nobody's in trouble." He glanced at Diane, and his face was not angry. It was something harder to stand than anger. It was curious. "Miss Faircloth, is there somewhere the two of us could talk? Just us. Your office, maybe." Diane's office was smaller than you'd expect, tucked behind the front desk, and it had one window that looked out on a light well and a single framed photograph on the wall that Marcus noticed the second he walked in. It was old. A younger Diane, beaming, standing beside a tired, kind-faced man in a manager's suit, the two of them laughing at something outside the frame. Diane sat down behind her desk very carefully, the way you sit when you are not sure your legs will hold. She had the look of a person waiting to be fired, and worse than fired, waiting to be told, at 57, that the things she had built her whole self around had been wrong the entire time. Marcus sat down across from her, in the plain chair, in the faded jacket, and the first thing he said undid every defense she had left. "I didn't come back here to take your job." Diane blinked. "I mean it," Marcus said. "I could have let Eleanor handle this. I could have walked out. But I stood out there and I watched you, and I thought, a woman doesn't run a door this hard for 19 years. Because she doesn't care. You care about this place so much it's got a hook in you somewhere. Nobody's that vigilant over nothing. He nodded toward the photograph on the wall. So, who is that? And what did it cost you? And Diane Faircloth, who had not told the whole thing to anyone in 22 years, told a man in a field jacket she had accused of theft 90 minutes earlier. She told him about the young art dealer with the rumpled coat and the warm laugh. About vouching for him. About the Whistler drawing and the service entrance and the 4 months of charges that were never paid. And she told him about Harold, the man in the photograph, who had stood in front of the owners and said the oversight was mine. Don't take her career for trusting the way I taught her to trust, and who had been quietly retired 3 months early, without the party, without the watch, without the send-off he had earned in 30 years, so that Diane could keep going. He gave me my job with his own hands, Diane said, and her voice cracked straight down the middle. And I swore I would never be that stupid again. I would never let a nice smile and a shabby coat fool me. I would never let anyone take advantage of this hotel while I was standing at the door. She pressed the back of her hand to her mouth, and somewhere along the way that turned into what you saw out there, into pointing at a tired man, because he didn't look like money. She looked at him, wrecked. I turned Harold's kindness into this. I took the best thing anybody ever did for me, and I made it into a reason to be cruel. Marcus did not interrupt. He did not rush to comfort her. He listened the way you listen to someone you've decided deserves to be heard all the way down. Then he told her something of his own. Not a speech. Just true. I built walls too, Marcus said. Different kind. I lost people years back. And I decided the way to never hurt like that again was to never let anybody all the way in. Called it being careful. It wasn't careful. It was just fear, wearing a nicer coat. He turned his cap over in his hands. Here's what took me too long to learn. The walls you build to keep the bad thing out, they don't keep it out. They just wall you in there with it. You've been in a room with that con man for 22 years, Diane. He left. You never did. Diane closed her eyes. Then Marcus asked the question he had come into that small office to ask. That kid out there at the desk. Rosa and the boy on security, the one who had his hand on my arm like he was scared he'd hurt me. Marcus's voice stayed gentle. You made them part of it. Just now. That young man's going to remember his whole life that his first month here, he helped march an innocent man across a lobby because someone told him to. How do you want to have shaped a kid like that? Because you're shaping them either way. Harold shaped you. What are you handing down? Diane put her face in her hands. That was the beat. The whole thing turned on it. I'm not asking you to grovel, Marcus said, standing. I'm not even asking you to forgive yourself. That's a long job. Longer than a morning. I'm just asking you to walk back out there and be the person Harold thought he was saving. There's a young woman named Rosa who did the bravest thing I've seen anybody do all year. And she did it against you. And she's out there right now wondering if it cost her everything. Go be worth what she risked. Then he left, and shut the door softly behind him, and left Diane Faircloth alone with the photograph of the only man who had ever refused to give up on her. For a long time the office door stayed shut. Then it opened, and Diane came out, and her eyes were red and she had not tried to hide it, which anyone who knew her understood was its own kind of earthquake. She did not go to Marcus. She did not go to Eleanor. She crossed the lobby to the front desk, to the 24-year-old clerk standing there certain she was about to be fired. And in front of the whole staff, Diane Faircloth said, Rosa, what you did just now, telling me I was wrong, in front of everyone, when I had all the power, and you had none, that is the single most valuable thing anyone has done for this hotel in 20 years. I've spent 19 of those years thinking my job was to protect this place from people. You just showed me it's to protect the people in it, including from me." Her voice held, barely. "I owe you an apology, and I owe this gentleman a far bigger one, and I'm going to say both out loud, because they should cost me something to say." She turned to Marcus. She did not mention that he owned the hotel. That was the thing Eleanor noticed, and never forgot that Diane's apology, when it came, had nothing to do with who he'd turned out to be. "Mr. Rourke, I accused you of theft because you were tired and unshaven and wore an old coat, and for no other reason on earth. It was wrong when I thought you were nobody, and it would have been exactly as wrong if you'd stayed nobody. I'm ashamed, and I'm sorry." Marcus looked at her for a long moment, and then he gave her the smile. The real one. The warm one. Slightly crooked. The one that had shown up in none of his movies and all of his best moments. "That's all I needed to hear," he said. Somewhere near the concierge desk, an old man who had worked at the Ellsworth for 41 years began, quietly, to applaud. It spread. Rosa was crying and pretending she wasn't, and Marcus Rourke, who owned every square inch of the marble and gold around him, picked up his battered canvas duffel off the floor himself, waved off the bellhop who rushed to take it, and carried his own bag toward the elevator to go finally meet the team that ran the hotel he'd flown all night to see honestly. He never mentioned the watch again. He never asked for anyone to be fired. He was, as ever, already gone up the marble stairs before the room had finished understanding what it had witnessed. Here's the part the story usually skips. The slow part. The true part. It did not fix the Ellsworth overnight. Nothing fixes anything overnight. Diane Faircloth offered Eleanor her resignation the next morning. Eleanor refused it, and so, quietly, did Marcus, who left a note that said only, "A person who can apologize like that in public is exactly who I want at my door. Stay. Be different. M." Diane kept the note in the frame, beside the photograph of Harold. And then the change began. And it was specific. Diane stopped reading shoes. She started a program the staff came to call the Second Look, a simple rule that no guest, member of the public, or wanderer off the street would ever be judged, questioned, or refused on the basis of how they were dressed, and that anyone who walked into the Ellsworth's lobby to get out of the rain and look at the plaster roses was welcome to sit in the lobby and look at the plaster roses. Because a beautiful room, Diane had decided, is only actually beautiful if it is not cruel about who gets to stand in it. She trained every new hire herself. She told them the whole story, the con man, the whistler, Harold, the morning she accused the owner. She told them the hard version, with herself as the cautionary tale, because she had finally understood that the most useful thing she owned was her own worst mistake. Rosa Vega was promoted twice in 3 years. The girl who had lived with 3 roommates in the mission became, before she was 30, the Ellsworth's youngest ever assistant director of guest relations, trained by Diane, who told anyone who'd listened that she was training the person who should have had her job all along. On Rosa's first day in the new role, Diane gave her a heavy gold watch, set 2 minutes fast, and said, "A person who's early has already won, and a person who tells the truth to power when she's got none of it, that person runs a hotel someday. Don't let it be a cruel one." And the old concierge who'd started the applause, Miss Ainsley, 41 years on the floor, retired that spring, and this time there was a party, and a send-off, and a gold watch that was actually presented, because Diane made certain of it. She stood up at his dinner and told the room she'd learned, very late, what it costs a place when it lets a good man leave without honoring him. Everybody understood she was talking about 2 men. Only she knew both their names. Years later, a hospitality magazine ran a profile of the Ellsworths' unlikely second life under its quiet new owner, and the writer asked Diane Faircloth about the morning that had turned the whole hotel around. Diane was quiet a while. "A man in an old coat let me accuse him of everything I was really afraid of about myself," she said. "And then he sat down in my office and asked me who I was still trying to protect. Nobody had asked me that in 22 years. She smiled. I'd spent my whole career guarding the door. He taught me the door was never the thing worth guarding." Marcus Rourke was asked about it exactly once, at a junket for some film, when a reporter brought up the story that had gone quietly around the internet. He looked puzzled for a second, like he had to reach back for it. Then he shrugged. "She loved that place more than anybody in it," he said. "She'd just gotten scared somewhere along the way. Most of us do." And he moved on to the next question, because he was, as ever, already gone before the credit arrived. I have told a lot of stories on this channel, but I keep coming back to this one. And I've thought a long time about why, and I don't think it's the reveal. The elevator opening, the color leaving Eleanor's face, the whole room realizing at once what it had done. That part is delicious, I'll admit it. That's the part we click for. But the part I actually keep is smaller. It's that Diane's apology, when it finally came, never once mentioned that he owned the place. She said sorry for what she'd have done to a nobody. And that's the whole thing, isn't it? Because a hotel apologizing to its owner is just self-preservation, but a woman apologizing to the tired stranger she thought he was, that's something else. That's a person actually changing. The reveal didn't fix Diane. The reveal just raised the stakes high enough that she finally had to look at herself. So here's the question the story left me with, and I don't have a clean answer for it. We all like to think we treat the tired stranger and the important guest exactly the same. But most of us have a Diane in us somewhere, some old wound that decided, a long time ago, that we had to sort people at the door to keep ourselves safe. And the hard truth is, you usually can't see who someone really is by looking. You can only see it by how you'd have treated them before you knew. Would I pass that test on a bad morning? Honestly, I'm not sure. Most of us aren't sure, and maybe that's the thing worth carrying out of that marble lobby, that the measure of a person was never how they treat the owner. It's how they treat the stranger they're certain is nobody. This story is fictional, inspired by the quiet kind of decency the best people are known for, the kind that treats the person in the old coat and the person in the corner office exactly the same. If it got to you, do me a favor down in the comments. Don't just say great story. Tell me about a time you were judged by how you looked. Or, if you're being honest, a time you did the judging. I read every one of them. They're the best part of this. And if you know someone who's been made to feel like they don't belong somewhere, send them this. It might be the exact thing they need to hear today. If you're new here, subscribe. There's another story coming, and I'd be glad to have you for it. See you in the next one.